Now let's move to that real magic sound that brings Bottleneck alive, and that's vibrato. The vibrato is there to give it life and to help it imitate the human voice. And in fact, throughout musical history, human beings seem to have this strong desire to imitate the human voice with instruments. In fact, the origin and history of slide is a bit lost in the murky mists of history. There's been a long-ranging argument as to whether slide began in Hawaii or whether it's an African-based idea. Well, my contention is that it really developed simultaneously in both places. The Hawaiian guitar was invented specifically by one individual in 1897, and there are African instruments that are slid with various implements. The issue gets further confused by the fact that in America, in the first couple of decades of this century, there were all kinds of traveling Hawaiian shows in vaudeville acts, and many blues guys, a lot of first-generation dobro players, Western swing players will all tell you that they heard Hawaiian musicians when they were young. And there were even black blues artists, such as Casey Bill Weldon, who played the guitar flat on his lap and called himself the Hawaiian Guitar Wizard. A pretty strange cross-culturalization there. At any event, people have this desire to imitate that sound. Now, the way I make vibrato is as follows. First of all, the human perception of pitch is such that when you make a vibrato, you don't go from the note to above the note and back down, or it sounds out of tune. Which it's all right for certain parts of the world to play that scale, but it certainly doesn't sound like blues if you go. You always have to slide from the note to below the note and back up. Now, the important thing, the thing that separates the pros from the amateurs here, is one of being very relaxed with the vibrato. So you don't want to tense up every muscle as if you were carrying a very heavy weight. What you want to do is literally hang by your thumb, and I want you to divide your arm into two parts. Part A is your thumb. Part B is everything else. So you're going to hang from your thumb, and you're going to use the weight of the slide, your hand, and your forearm to move back and forth. You're going to a little bit rolling on the ball of your thumb, and what I want you to feel is the actual flapping of the muscle under here. I don't know if you were one of those obnoxious kids who went up to their grandmother and went like this on the bottom of her arms, but that's the kind of thing you want to feel. You want to pretend that you have no bones in your forearm and that the muscles back here should be flapping a little bit. And so let's just try to make a nice vibrato on the 5th fret, 1st string. The width of the vibrato is a personal decision. But generally speaking, if it's too tight, it just sounds nervous. If it's too wide, it sounds really out of tune. So I usually go about 1 fret, something like this. And just rolling on my thumb, hanging my whole arm here, not being afraid to really let it hang. And just like if you listen to a singer, a saxophone player, or a violinist, usually as the note starts to die, the vibrato speeds up a little bit. Now, the next question that probably comes up is, well, when do you start vibratoing? Do you do it on your way up to the note, or do you wait till you get to the note? Well, let's listen and see what it sounds like. If you do it on the way to the note, it's going to sound like a comedy effect, something like this. It's not really musical. The beauty of being a slide player is you have so much control over these sorts of musical decisions as to how fast to slide up to the note, what to do when you get there, how long to do it for, how wide you want to make the vibrato. So I want you to really think in terms of caressing it and notice that I kind of, even though the slide is basically moving in a straight line, in my mind, it's making a bit of a downward curve, like. So what I want to do now is something that will be musically rather mundane, but it's an analogy that I'll just ask you to trust me here. Let's take the simple first part of the major scale. And what I want you to do, and I realize this doesn't sound like blues right off the bat, but it's going to give you that real control and that real musical, human, passionate, caressing sound. So I want you to do something like this. notice I'm taking about 3 or 4 frets to slide up to the note, and I'm really caressing it, and then starting my vibrato, and then as I'm ready to go to the next note, there's a brief pause. This is what you should spend the most time doing, is working on your vibrato. You don't really want to sound like this. It's just a little too tense. You can have that available when you want to reach your maximum level of angst in the song, but generally speaking, you want to... I'll show you how to do that in a little while. Now, what about the other strings? Well, again, in our efforts to maintain a really clean tone, you're going to change your angle depending on what you're playing. I rarely play all 6 strings. In this tuning, my root is on the 5th string, so I will play 5 of them. Now, when you're playing on several strings, obviously by necessity, your slide has to be parallel with the fingerboard, and so that you're contacting all the strings. And your semicircle of your fingertips gets compressed a little bit so that your index finger can lie on the strings and stop all the noise, because the more strings you have, the more potential for noise. So let's just, let's see, let's try first just 3 strings at a time. We'll do a 5th fret, 7th fret, and 12th fret. Let's do some fast slides with a staccato stop at each of those positions. Now let's try it on 5 of the strings. From there, to there, to there. First we'll do a staccato. 1, 2. There are 2 ways to accomplish that with your right hand. What I just did was kind of a grab, where I just pinched everything. But you could also do it with a downward strum with your thumb, which requires definitely more damping on the right hand. And you can really dig in. One of the great ways that the old guitarists of the 20s were able to cut through the poor recording equipment of the day was to really lean into the strings, and rather than just picking across the strings like this with a pick at a 90-degree angle, they actually leaned it down onto the strings, and rather than going pick, 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 they just pushed in and slid their whole arm and let the strings slip off the end of the pick, and that was what created the picking action. So the difference between a non-compressed normal strum, which sounds like this, as opposed to a compressed one, there's quite a difference in the projection and the volume. And these old players were able to cut through with big bands and still be heard, even though the whole band was being recorded with only 1 microphone. So, on the full chord slide, let's do it again with the thumb, using a compression stroke, followed immediately with damping. Okay, here we go. And. Now, if you're sliding up, notice that I'm starting to strum long before I've gotten to my proper fret. But still, the mind reads it as this, even though you're really, literally going. But it's happening so fast that your perception is such that it sounds like 1 chord. Okay, now, what about playing on an inside string without playing unwanted strings? This is where the curve on the edge of my slide really comes in handy, because what you have to do is the opposite angle of what you did on the first string where you were facing out. You now have to actually lean in, and rather than using the whole side of your finger to get it, you use a little more of the tip of your finger kind of close to the slide. Can you see my hand position here? It's a lot different than my normal hand position. So I'm getting in closer, and I'm damping with the tip of my finger right behind the slide. At this point, I perhaps should remind you that rather than pushing down with the slide, you only have to contact the string. You don't want to be able to go, you don't want to hear steps in between the notes, but just a smooth slide with just contacting the string. And also, if you push down too hard with the damping, you'll have problems. So it's all a matter of light contact. So on an inner string, let's take the third string, third fret, which is a note that I basically refer to as your buddy. You use it, and it will help you. This is a note that all the blues licks bounce off of. Now, as a test to see if you're in the correct position, you should play that note and see what the other strings are doing. Just hold that note and listen. You don't want to hear any of this. You don't want to hear any bad contact or buzzing. You only want to hear the note that you're trying to play. Now that last one, I did a little bit of a strike and slide. Let's try that. Let's talk for a minute about the blue note here. African perception of music and European perception of music are definitely coming from two different traditions. The European belief is that the highest form of musical expression is obtained through purity of tone. The African belief is that you increase the emotional content of a tone by dirtying it up a little bit. That's why African marimbas have little bottle caps in their resonators to actually make them buzz when they play. A lot of African guitarists that I've seen have Coke bottle tops and things like that nailed onto their guitar to get this sort of buzzing sound. Obviously, blues singing is not operatic singing. It's not a pure tone. If you listen to Howling Wolf, he sounds like boulders rolling down a hill of sandpaper. The blue note comes out of that tradition. What the famous blue note is, it's an interval that's neither major or minor. Here's the major, and here's minor. It's kind of in between. And you've got this annoying fret here that prevents you from being in between. So the way the old blues guys handled this problem was a couple of different ways. One would be a trill, which kind of averages out the two notes. Another would be a bend. Another would be to play that note with this adjacent open string. So I've got the minor note fretted and the major note open, and it sounds like this. That's a dirty sound. Now, obviously, the final way to get it is with a slide. So it's one of the rare cases where you're just a little shy of being in tune. You're a little sharp of the fret. Rather than thinking of it as a single position that's a little sharp, it's better to think of that note as a note that's always in motion. It doesn't have a stop. You pass through that frequency. So if you notice, my path of travel goes from about halfway in this fret to about halfway in that fret, and that averages out your space there. Now normally, I move the guitar around a fair amount when I'm playing, and you may see me constantly adjusting the guitar as we speak here, but it's really just to avoid blinding the camera operator. It's one of the drawbacks of using a metal guitar, so if you ever make a video yourself, you have to keep that in mind. Now, let's move away from the slide just for a minute and talk about some of the right-hand techniques that are necessary to play some blues rhythms. The blues rhythm and the blues fingerpicking is actually easier than standard fingerpicking because there's not a whole lot of alternating thumb. The thumb is a timekeeper. So the first thing you need to be able to do is just this. And I usually damp that stroke quite a bit. Now let's try the same stroke, but taking the first two strings and your first two fingers and doing a grab. Now let's put some eighth notes in between. Now the real mark of distinction here is not to do everything with your thumb that your fingers are doing. So your thumb's still just playing the main beats. So the way to think about that is pinch and pinch and pinch, where the ands are played by your fingers. The pinches are played by everything. All of the greatest blues masters were kings and queens of playing around with dividing the beat either in 2 or in 3. The distinction is fairly subtle, and the pulse is exactly the same. The difference is dividing it in 2 sounds like this. And dividing it in 3 sounds more like a heartbeat. And when I say 3, it's because the underlying feeling is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. It's triplets without the little 2 of each triplet. Now, to make a full triplet, for example, the old Elmore James lick, which he stole from Robert Johnson, who probably stole it from somebody else. Before you get to play it on slide, you got to get the right hand here. So this is a triplet. It's pinch and a pinch. You probably see my body just tense a little bit on each beat. It's only to make a cleaner, damped stroke on the thumb. Let's try that pattern. In fact, let's take the triplet through each of the 4 beats of the measure. So first it would be 1, 2, 3, 2, a 3, a 4. Now let's try it putting it on the second beat, which would be 1, 2, and a 3, a 4. Third beat, which would be 1, a 2, a 3, and a 4, and. And obviously, let's put it on the last beat. A 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, and a 1. Now, don't forget that there's no law that was ever written that said you have to anchor your pinky and keep your hand in one position. If you do that, you're restricting yourself to a small tone color area of the string. And with slide, it becomes even more important to decide where along the string you're going to pick it. Just listen to the difference in timbral quality here. The roundest, warmest sound is going to be 12 frets above the note. So I really recommend keeping your hand free and not anchoring. Even when I'm damping, I have the freedom to move. So just to increase your confidence, if you are a finger picker that has traditionally been anchoring with your pinky, I'd like you to just do a couple of really wild Pete Townsend strokes here, just to increase your confidence that you will actually hit the strings. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let's try it in 2 areas of the string. So I'm going to alternate from here to there, always keeping this giant circle here, this exaggerated movement. So you see, there really isn't any need to damp. You can even just move along everywhere along the string. The compression strokes are most efficient at the bridge, but they can even be done here. Let's try a series of compression strokes where it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. Ready? 1, 2, ready, go. Let's try it with upstrokes. Again, with a really wild motion. If you ever have seen any film of Son House or Booker White playing the guitar, they're not sitting there picking with their fingers. They're raging back and forth with their arm like this. So let's just do this. it may seem a little dramatic at this point, but it's just to give you that complete freedom. I'm really a believer in playing with my arm rather than just my fingers, partly because as I approach middle age, my tendons and muscles don't work as well as they did when I was younger, so I have to maximize my strength as much as possible. And I think if you try lifting a 20-pound weight with one finger, you'll find it's a lot easier to do with your whole arm. So you'll find my motions are sometimes look like they're coming from my fingers, but whenever I strum, it's my whole arm, my shoulder, and even some of my right lung. Before we actually go on to playing some blues tunes, I want to show you one more specialty technique that I've kept secret for 25 years, and now I'm going to share it with you. And that is a technique I've stolen from Hawaiian guitar. And it's a way of making artificial harmonics that is not normally done by upright guitarists. You may have noticed in your musical travels over the years that when you make a harmonic, say at the 12th fret, try strumming it over on this side. And lo and behold, it's the same note with a slightly better tone quality. If you take a good look at your string when you make a harmonic at the 6th fret, you'll notice that rather than the string moving in one big elliptical wave, it gets divided into two smaller elliptical waves. And if you look very closely at your own guitar, you'll see a dead spot here where the string isn't vibrating. So what that tells you is the note being produced on this side is exactly the same as that side. Now, how can we make this more efficient so that you can do this with one hand instead of with two, thereby freeing up your left hand to make artificial harmonics? The way I accomplish that is I use this part of my hand to actually make the harmonic, and I play it on the wrong side of the string with my thumb pick. And rather than keeping my hand still, which kind of kills the note, I strum right through it. Let's do a few of those. You might want to switch off your tape and try that on your own, because it will take a few moments to develop that. Now here's where the magic comes in. Any note will have a higher harmonic 12 frets higher than it. So if I do this, then I put my slide here, I just have to move this palm one fret up, move it again. It's a wonderful sound that gives you a completely new octave to work in. My recommendation is that you spend a lot of time practicing it, but you must look at your left hand. Unless you have an operation to sever the muscle in your right eye, you can't focus on both hands. So this one has to be done intuitively by feel. And you just get used to the idea that for every distance X you move with this hand, you move 1/2 that distance with this hand. So the way I would practice that is simply... Now when you get to here, you've just run out of frets on this side, so there really isn't anything to look at anyway. And so you just continue with movement and experimentation. I usually start to fade when I get up to about here. It gets, the point gets so small that it's very hard to be accurate with it. Let's just try that little move. This is the top two strings. I'm starting the slide on the 10th fret, which means I have to start my harmonic 1 octave above the 10th fret. Let's just do a single note. Now I've got my palm down on the corresponding 5th fret above the 5th fret, and I'm playing with my thumb. And vibrato helps it come out. And notice how you can take that note and move it. It's a really great way to work the sounds of your guitar to give you an entirely smaller guitar inside your guitar. Another signature move that I make is to take a natural harmonic and then slide it up. Let's just try to make a natural harmonic using your finger. Right? That's pretty easy. Now what I want you to do is do that and then get your slide and get your damping finger ready all the way on the headstock